In this series, and exclusive to this channel, you'll hear a word-for-word account of what the jury were told after hearing 9 months of evidence during Lucy Letby's original trial. Now, with so much harmful misinformation currently being spread online and in mainstream publications surrounding this case, this series seeks to provide for the first time exactly what transpired in court. That means no ill-informed commentary or any bias, simply the evidence as presented during the trial itself. This video has been made possible by the purchasing of court-approved transcripts, further details of which can be found in the video description box below. What you'll hear next is a detailed summary of the prosecution's case against Lucy Letby. This took place at Manchester Crown Court and was conducted by Nicholas Johnson, KC. As I have indicated previously, we want to focus primarily on the evidence that relates directly to each of the infants named on this indictment. However, whilst we recognise that this is a case about babies and not about paper, we suggest that a brief consideration of Lucy Letby's explanation for some of the paperwork seized on her arrest may help you to assess her honesty and credibility as a witness generally, and better enable you to consider her explanation of the events surrounding the collapses of these babies. I want to start. I'm not going to deal in great detail with these jottings. I'll start with Exhibit 15, which is the handover sheet of Child P and Child O. Lucy Letby suggested that she took this home deliberately to rely on it as an aid memoir when writing up the drugs on her following shift. But when you look at page 2, which shows the back of this document, the only drug you will see recorded on that sheet is caffeine. So Lucy Letby's explanation is not true. Why is she not prepared to tell you the true reason? It can't be because it helps her, can it? We suggest that the handover sheets are capable of informing you of her unhealthy interest in some of these children, whether directly, as in the case of Child M, for example, or indirectly, as in the case of Child G, whose handover sheet would have been a very useful reminder of how to spell her mother's French name when conducting a covert Facebook search. And when determining or considering Lucy Letby's credibility, her believability generally, we encourage you to think about these things. First, her claim that her collection of handover sheets, acquired over years and retained through multiple house moves, was simply a consequence of her tendency to collect paper. Second, her assertion that they were stored confidentially, her inconsistent assertions about owning a shredder and whether or not students receive handover sheets. Third, her assertion that the word keep written on the side of the shredder box at her parents' house referred to the shredder rather than the handover sheets that were in the box. And fourthly, her assertion that documents containing sensitive information about dead babies were, to use her word, insignificant. None of that stands up to any sensible analysis, and as I say, if she's not telling the truth about that, is the true explanation one that's going to help her in the context of the allegations being made in this case? You can safely conclude the answer to that question is no. A second category of paper exhibits seized on her arrest are the various notes that she wrote after her removal from the neonatal unit. Here I'd like to start with image 19, please, which is the post-it note. This was inside her 2016 diary. We suggest that the words "I am evil, I did this" should be read literally and taken as a confession. In the defence's opening address to you back in October, it was suggested to you, and I quote, "Anyone who reads this fully with an ounce of human understanding will appreciate that this is the anguished outpouring of a young woman in fear and despair." Well, the evidence that Lucy Letby gave about her anguish related significantly to the circumstances in which she was removed from the neonatal unit, and according to her, being forbidden from having any contact with her friends and colleagues, other than Dr. A, Mina Lapalainen, and Nurse E. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, it was Lucy Letby who introduced the suggestion that she was isolated, not the prosecution. It was the defence that introduced the suggestion that she was isolated. And its purpose, or part of its purpose, was to explain the notes and her behaviour. That impression may have remained until she was cross-examined, and on the final day of cross-examination, a spreadsheet was given to her, setting out the contents of her phone and her diary, together with some photographs. And as she so appropriately summarised it, the spreadsheet in effect set out her social life in the period of July 2016 to July 2018, which includes the time that this and other notes were written. Lucy Letby accepted, didn't she, that in reality she had a very, very active social life, her words, which included socialising with many of her former colleagues, including the people that she, up to that stage, was telling you that she had been forbidden from having contact with. On May 2nd this year, you were asked by your counsel about the circumstances surrounding your suspension from the neonatal unit. Do you remember? Yes. And you told the jury that you just changed as a person. Your mental health deteriorated and you felt very isolated. And these are your words. I felt very isolated from my friends and family on the unit. Yes. You went on to say, we were a very supportive unit. Regardless of whether we were personal friends, we were a very supportive nursing team. Do you remember that? Yes. You don't want to change that, do you? No. At the time, the hospital advised me not to communicate with anybody on the unit and to sort of go with the pretense that it was a voluntary secondment. And it was identified at the time that there were 2 or 3 friends that I would be able to speak to, but otherwise I was not to have contact. Not to have contact with anyone on the unit. That's what you said, isn't it? Yes. Was it true? Yes. Did you abide by that direction? Yes. So you didn't have contact with anyone but the people who you were told you could have contact with. At that very beginning part, yes, it did change as time went on. Ah, well, you didn't tell us about that. You were given a document this morning, weren't you? Yes. What's in the document? My social life. Your social life. Where did the document come from? You've made it. Yes, it's come from the prosecution, hasn't it? Yes. And it was given to you this morning before we started. Yes. And you have read it, haven't you? Yes. And you know that it disproves everything you said about your contact with your friends, doesn't it? I disagree. No. You disagree? So you are saying there's nothing in that document showing you in contact with people other than Nurse E, Dr. A, and Mina Lapalainen? No, you're not saying that. That was what you were telling the jury was the position on May 2nd, isn't it? Yes. Yes. Every day I have asked you the same question, haven't I? Yes. Whether there's anything that you have said which you would like to change. Yes. And you were telling the jury on May 2nd that from your suspension through to your arrest, you were not allowed to have contact with anyone from the unit other than Nurse E, Dr. A, and Mina Lapalainen. Yes. Yes. Why did you tell that lie? I was mistaken, so as time went on, it was in the table document in the post-indictment I was allowed to start communicating with the unit, but I was not to tell them any of the details of my secondment. You were exaggerating, weren't you? No. You were telling the jury a sob story, weren't you? No. That you had been cut off from your family, as you defined them. Yes. Yes. Were you looking for sympathy? Yes, it was a very difficult time. Yes. You thought you'd get sympathy by telling a lie, didn't you? No. Was it just a mistake? Yes. When she was re-examined on all this by her own counsel, she was asked whether she was at least allowed a social life, the implication being that we had produced a schedule to suggest that in having a social life, she was behaving inappropriately. That was never our suggestion. Our point is much more relevant. We say that she up to that point had been deliberately trying to mislead you about her situation at the time of writing this note, with the intention of invoking some pity on your part and to deflect you from the obvious and literal meaning of some of those words. We say she is a liar. She lied to you. And that the fact she lied to you is proved by an analysis of her social life. That's the point. We're not suggesting she wasn't entitled to a social life. So taking stock then, ladies and gentlemen, so far we've reviewed 7 cases. We've seen that child F and child L were poisoned with insulin. Each of them, for the reasons I explained, was deliberately targeted. Each of their brothers was injected with air. The attack on child E was interrupted by his mother, the mother of child E and F. And so Lucy Letby persuaded her to leave and pressed home the attack to make it look like there was an ongoing problem. That was something that Lucy Letby repeated with child P on June 24th at about 12:30, in what I have termed from time to time the tea room attack. Child P was paralysed and cannot have dislodged his own tube. Child P had a liver injury which was found after his death, which in itself, and viewed in a vacuum, might have been explicable by CPR. But when you factor in what happened to his brother the day before and the injuries he suffered, which included much more serious liver injuries, the possibilities of an innocent coincidence are eliminated. And if you accept Dr. Marna Reedy's uncontroverted evidence about what was found at child O's post-mortem, there can be no doubt that he was murdered. If you put that finding with the deliberate poisonings of child F and child L, put that with what happened to their brothers, and factor in the false and misleading entries in Lucy Letby's notes, we say the picture is crystal clear. And therefore, so far, we have 3 murders and 4 attempted murders, and we still have to look at a further 10 children. So I'm going to now review child A and child B. Child A and child B were born at 31 weeks plus 2 days on the 7th of June 2015. Child A died the following day, and child B had a serious collapse the day after that. Child A died almost exactly 24 hours after he had been born. Not only were the cases of child A and B the first that you heard, but they were the first time you became aware of the fact that the defence was suggesting that Dr. Jairam and Dr. Harkness are liars. You'll remember that his lordship directed you last Thursday that the questions from counsel are not the evidence. It's the answers and the way that the answers are given which is the evidence. We dealt time and time again in cross-examination with what witnesses had said they saw, and we invited Lucy Letby to contradict them. Almost without variation, she simply said that she did not see what they say they saw. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you are going to have to decide where the truth lies. Did Dr. Jairam and Dr. Harkness make up what they saw with child A and B to implicate Lucy Letby in the most serious crimes and to distract from a few relatively minor imperfections in treatment? We know now that a couple of weeks before the death of child A, Lucy Letby had completed a course relating, amongst other things, to intravenous lines. On the course, the dangers of air embolus were mentioned. Is that just a coincidence, or was that what gave her the idea? Well, we will never know. We say that Lucy Letby killed child A with an injection of air into his bloodstream. When he collapsed, she was standing over him. She tried the same thing with his sister the following night, but child B mercifully survived. The evidence relating to the twins started with the statements of their mum and dad, and you'll remember the mother's account of her antiphospholipid syndrome and the fact that she was receiving specialist treatment in London. And it had been intended to deliver the twins in London, but they arrived early because the mother had preeclampsia. The primary concern at the Countess of Chester appears to have centred around the antiphospholipid syndrome. But you heard from Professor Sally Kinsey that had absolutely no bearing on their difficulties, and Lucy Letby accepted it had no bearing on their difficulties. And thus we suggest the idea that that was the cause of what happened is a complete non-starter. The staff at Chester knew that child A and B were much wanted babies. That's in Lucy Letby's child B interview at page 14. Child A had been doing well after his birth. From 4 minutes of age, he was breathing for himself. He was described as, quote, crying and vigorous on stimulation by Dr. Beach. You'll find that at tile 8 at 2100 hours. By 10 minutes of age, he was breathing for himself in air. He was put on CPAP, and from a couple of hours of age, he was essentially on hourly observations. At 9:45 on June 8th, he was handling well on examination by Dr. Ogden. But on the afternoon of the 8th, there were problems getting a UVC into a satisfactory position. If you want to find the notes relating to that, they're tiles 134 and 143 to 146. And you'll remember that the cannula that was being used to give him fluids tissued or blocked at 1600 hours, and that's tile 141. This is one of the points that was explored in the evidence, isn't it? Dr. Harkness was the registrar at the time. He was asked to intervene. He had come on duty at 1700 hours, and his task was to insert the lines into both child A and child B. He achieved that in child A's case at 1900 hours, and that's at tile 154. And it was that delay in cross-examination that Lucy Letby suggested may have contributed to child A's death. Well, for reasons that we'll come to, we suggest that is nonsense. Child A crashed minutes after Lucy Letby came on duty, and he died shortly afterwards. And there's no doubt, is there, that Lucy Letby was involved in child A's treatment, and that she and Mel Taylor, who'd been his nurse on the day shift, started an infusion through the recently inserted long line sometime after 2000 hours on June 8th. The evidence shows that at the time child A crashed, Lucy Letby was literally standing over him. In the room at the time were Mel Taylor, who was at the computer behind that half wall. Do you remember? In Nursery 1, the wall that's between the two doors. Caroline Oakley, who was looking after child B. And Dr. Harkness, who was inserting a line into a third child. And we know how much concentration putting one of these very thin lines into the vein of a child of this age takes. Dr. Harkness' note records that child A went into cardiac arrest within a minute or two of him starting to insert the line into that other child. In terms of what was going on and the number of people in and close to the room, this is a very similar set of circumstances to what happened with child L&M in the afternoon, I think it was, of April 9th. Lucy Letby was operating in plain sight, wasn't she? Dr. Harkness said that when he intervened, he bagged child A and saw that his chest was rising and falling. So yet another case where that's the clinical presentation. So the issue wasn't with his breathing. But despite the fact that air was going in and out, child A's sats were falling, as was his heart rate. Dr. Harkness intubated child A, but that didn't help. And CPR began at 28 minutes past 8, 20:28. That's at tile 195. What Dr. Harkness saw at that point, it's a long time ago now, but I'm sure you'll all remember the gist of it at least, was this. He described his words, quote, very unusual patchiness of skin, unusual skin colour and skin change, which he'd never seen before, and he only saw later at the Countess of Chester in the case of child E. Later in his evidence, he described what he saw as, quote, patches of a kind of blue-purple colour. There were patches of red colour. There were white patches, and they didn't fit with something that you'd find in a baby that's not pumping any blood around the body. Dr. Harkness made the point that he was too busy trying to save child A's life to get a definitive, considered description. He said he saw, quote, bright red patches, which doesn't fit with someone dying. I'm adding the words with someone dying because that was the context. Because bright red patches means you've got blood going round your body. In cross-examination, Dr. Harkness was criticised for not writing down the details of the discoloration or what he saw in the medical notes. It was suggested to Dr. Harkness, quote, you have been influenced in that recollection by conversations that have taken place about skin colouring, and that has led you to apply that to what you describe with child A. So that was the suggestion being put to Dr. Harkness on October 20th last year. Quite what the terms of those alleged conversations were, plainly were never suggested by the defence. When they happened wasn't suggested. Who they were with was not suggested. But if those conversations were about patches of blue, purple and red colour flitting around, why do you think that would have been? It would have been because that's what people were seeing. Dr. Harkness was criticised for not putting the description in a statement he wrote some time later. And you might ask yourselves, what's the implication there? What's being suggested by saying, well, you didn't put that in a statement? That Dr. Harkness didn't see anything? Is that the suggestion? That he didn't see what he said he saw? It was suggested to him, quote, discussions had set in your mind the impression of this colour when it may not have been there at all. That's Lucy Letby's case on the 20th of October. Well, Dr. Harkness said, no, because that's the same thing I saw with child E. That's what made him realise how significant this was. You'll remember, won't you, the animated conversation spoken of by Dr. C that I was reminding you of yesterday in child E's case. And again, ladies and gentlemen, we have, don't we, the power of circumstantial evidence. The same witness seeing the same thing in two apparently unconnected cases. I say apparently unconnected. You know what the connection was, of course. She's sitting in the dock. Back to what was going on. Dr. Jairam, he also told you about child A's collapse. He gave evidence on the 24th of October last year. He told us about child A's heart trace on the Philips monitor, and the effect of what he was saying was that there was no problem with child A's heart. You might remember his references to P waves, the QRS complex, and a T wave. What he was saying in medical language was what he could see. Heart trace on the monitor was normal, wasn't it? Child A was in a reduced level of consciousness. You'll remember what Dr. Jairam said about inserting the ETT without anaesthetic and how babies usually protest when that is done. But there was no protest here because of the desperate condition in which child A was. And to Dr. Jairam's mind, there was a disconnect or a contradiction between child A's heart activity, which on the monitor appeared to be fine, and yet his reduced perfusion, the fact that he was grey rather than pink. Although the heart was pumping normally, there was no arrhythmia. In other words, no irregular heartbeat. And although the heart was pumping normally, something was stopping the blood circulating properly. Child A's sats were crashing, and there was the purple-pink flitting patches. Dr. Jairam described them as, quote, pink patches that appeared mainly on the torso, on the abdomen, which seemed to sort of appear and disappear and flit around. And I've never seen anything like this before. Child A's collapse did not fit with him having been so well immediately before the collapse. Child A's breathing was being supported, air going in and out of his lungs, but his SATs not improving. What Dr. Jairam was seeing as child A declined was something he had never seen before. He said to you, quote, it still doesn't fit to me with any disease process that I have ever seen, learned about, read about in my career. Why didn't he respond as he should have done? And Dr. Jairam excluded the idea that child A's collapse was in some way due to arrhythmia. Do you remember he was asked questions about the position of the line, and you saw the position of the line on the X-ray? He gave several reasons why this was not arrhythmia. First, the line wasn't actually in the right place to have caused an arrhythmia because it was not on the sinus, which is the medical term for the natural pacemaker in the heart, the thing that controls the heart rhythm. Second, he made what, when you say it, is an obvious point. What he could see on the Philips monitor was a regular heartbeat, not an irregular heartbeat. And third, the ECG, where you put the stickers onto child A. That was normal as well. And he said that if the long line had been the problem, they would have seen the abnormal rhythm and withdrawn the line. Of course, all that ignores the discoloration, doesn't it? Because that's got nothing to do with arrhythmia, or indeed the similarity with the events of child B the following night. And Dr. Jairam was vigorously taken to task on behalf of Lucy Letby because in his notes at the time and in his communication with the coroner, he had not mentioned the discoloration. He said that the reason for that was because he hadn't realised the significance of what he had seen. He said that the significance only became apparent when the same signs appeared in later children. It was suggested on behalf of Lucy Letby that Dr. Jairam was making things up to fit his theory. It was put in terms that he had not seen the discoloration he described, although that was not quite how Lucy Letby put it when she gave evidence. He said that he did see what he said he did, and it was then suggested to Dr. Jairam that he had an expectation that people would just accept what he had to say because he's a doctor. Well, you'll be the judges of that, ladies and gentlemen. When Dr. J-Ram was cross-examined on February 22nd this year about the case of child M, he was referred back to the case of child A. And it was suggested again, in blunt terms, that the discoloration is not what you saw. And ladies and gentlemen, we suggest again this is all smoke and mirrors. It's all distraction. The attack on Doctors J-Ram and Harkness was done in an effort to distract you from the truth. If the evidence of those doctors stood alone, we would suggest it is reliable and trustworthy. But fortunately, we suggest that your task in determining where the truth really lies is very straightforward on this issue, because there is other evidence to help you. And importantly, evidence that is not disputed. Can we start, please, by looking at this, ladies and gentlemen, as it's so important? It's the Child A interviews, so interview bundle number 1. An interview on the 4th of July 2018. So at the top of page 8, Lucy Letby is saying, quote, "Babies are usually quite pink and here become more pale, as in almost white." Then further down the page, she says, "Mottled is a bit more, almost like a rash appearance, like a blotchy red marks on the skin." At the bottom, so when the baby's quite pale and white, they can have sort of red areas on them, like reddy purple. She was then asked a question, "When you talk about this mottled rash, can you give us any further description, shape?" She then replied, "I think from memory it was more on the side that had his line in. It was his left." She was then asked a question, "And you describe a red-purple colour. Can you help us with any comparisons with anything colour-wise?" She replied, "I think he was more pale than mottling than the little areas of the mottling." So that's the starter. How did Lucy Letby remember that? Because it wasn't actually in her notes. But there we are, just like Doctors J-Ram and Harkness. The way Lucy Letby sought to explain this in cross-examination when I was asking her questions was that what she was explaining here was just normal blotchiness. To quote her directly, what she said was, quote, "I was referring to mottling. That's how I would describe mottling. And I also felt that he was more pale than mottled." We say that's a lie. As she did at several stages during the interview process, what appear to be apparently incriminating admissions are explained away by Lucy Letby as being something else. And the most startling, or one of the most startling examples of that will come to in due course with child N and the time at which she saw blood and when the intubation happened. You'll remember all that. But we suggest that when you read that interview, as you can if you wish, it's clear that what Lucy Letby was describing in the interview was something wholly unusual. But of course, if she accepts that now, she knows it causes real problems for her defence. And you won't have forgotten, ladies and gentlemen, that paragraph 39 of her defence statement, she did not use the word mottling to describe what she saw in child A. She used the word blotchiness, a very different word. Although in cross-examination, she suggested to you that those words are interchangeable. Well, you will be the judges of that. A further significant piece of evidence from Lucy Letby was in cross-examination on May 18th this year. There was the following exchange between me and Lucy Letby. I asked Lucy Letby, "Was child A's death anything to do with Mel Taylor?" She replied, "I don't know why child A died." I then asked, "But I'm asking you whether it's your case that it had anything to do with Mel Taylor." And listen to this. She replied, "If we agree that the cause of death was an air embolus, then I believe she attached fluid to those lines. Yes." I then said, "So that's Mel Taylor's fault?" She replied, "Yes, if that's what we agree, that child A died from that, then yes." I then said, "Because you weren't standing over him at the time he collapsed." She replied, "No, I didn't have access to his lines, so therefore if an air embolism came, it must have come from the person connecting the fluids, which isn't me." Well, it's something you might want to consider, ladies and gentlemen, but we suggest that there Lucy Letby was as good as accepting that child A died from an air embolus. An interesting concession, we say, but it doesn't end there. Nurse A was Lucy Letby's friend and mentored her when she was a student. Although it's a long time ago, I'm sure you'll remember that when child A crashed, Nurse A was just coming back into the unit and she stepped straight into nursery 1 and did the CPR for child A. She noticed a strange discoloration pattern on child A that she had, you know what I'm going to say, don't you, that she had never seen before. Nurse A, her friend, never seen before. All Nurse A's years of experience, and she too was seeing something she had never seen before. And she described it in several ways. Quote, "He looked very ill, but he had a discoloration pattern that I've never seen before. It was this purpley blotchiness with white that I'd not seen before." Blotchiness, the same word that appears in a defence statement at paragraph 39. She said that what stuck in her memory was that, quote, "it had come on very suddenly, just how unusual it was." And she said it was all over his chest. Later in her evidence, Nurse A said that what she saw on child A had the same appearance, those were her words, the same appearance as his sister the following night. And Nurse A was then referred to the note she had made in child B's case at TAL 218. And the note says, "Colour changed rapidly to purple blotchiness with white patches." And it was then suggested to Nurse A, on behalf of Lucy Letby, that she may have imposed her description of what she saw on child B onto her memory of what happened to child A. And the basis for that was what she had said to the police in an audio recorded statement. And she said, in no uncertain terms, she had not been influenced by what anyone else had said. She wasn't accused of being a liar, was she? Do you remember me saying to you yesterday, part of the strategy here of Lucy Letby is doctors bad. Bad people, doctors, they make stuff up. She can't quite bring herself to say it about her friends though, sometimes, can she? Dr. Rachel Lambie, do you remember her? She was involved in both the resuscitations of child A and child B, but she didn't make any notes in child A's case. The relevance of what Dr. Lambie says to the case of child A depends whether or not you accept that what was seen in his case was the same as what was seen in child B's case, so we rely on Nurse A to make that connection. I'll deal with it in a moment when I get to child B, but what Dr. Lambie told you was that when she got to child B, who was in a state of collapse, she was, quote, very dusky, pale grey in colour, and as we were helping her, she was developing widespread blotches. That word again from the defence statement. Patches of purpley red colour, they would flush up, last about a few seconds, 10 seconds, and then disappear, and then reappear elsewhere. What she wrote in the medical records, and it's in the child B sequence at TAL 243, was this: widespread purple discoloration of skin with white patches. And Dr. Lambie too said she had never seen anything like it before. She said, quote, "It was very grey and pale looking, flashes of what looked like bruising or reddening under the skin." Do you remember the meningococcal rashes spoken of by other people? It looks like bruising under the skin, we've been told, which would appear for maybe 10 seconds and then go, but appear somewhere else. And when cross-examined on behalf of Lucy Letby, Dr. Lambie confirmed that in her witness statement, she said this: "It was very grey and pale looking, flashes of what looked like bruising or reddening under the skin, and they would appear for maybe 10 seconds and then go, but appear somewhere else." Ladies and gentlemen, you will remember that Dr. Harkness, a bad doctor, made the point that his primary focus was trying to save child A's life, not to record the perfect description of something he had never seen before. Have he and Dr. J-Ram made up what they saw? Or do the descriptions given by Lucy Letby herself in interview of Nurse A, her friend, and Dr. Lambie prove that what Drs. J-Ram and Harkness said is true? Remembering all the time that the flitting discoloration is only one of the signs of an air embolus. Ladies and gentlemen, if you conclude that Drs. J-Ram and Harkness were telling the truth, because we say they are telling the truth, then what do you make of the attacks on their integrity? What was the purpose of attacking them for saying something that we suggest Lucy Letby herself was saying in interview? Something that was not seriously challenged when it was said by her friend, Nurse A. We suggest the attack had a number of aims. First, it was designed to deflect you from the evidence, designed to make the case about personalities rather than about the evidence. Second, it was part of an overall strategy to try to destabilise Dr. J-Ram, who's been an important witness in several of the individual children's cases. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, it was part of Lucy Letby's general approach to the case, that essentially the nurses are good and overworked and the doctors are bad. The defence suggestion is that the doctors are seeking to cover up their own shortcomings by blaming Lucy Letby for the deaths and collapses. The defence are suggesting that there is a medical conspiracy going on, the Gang of Four, just as they are suggesting that an unidentified police officer tipped off Dr. Evans that there was a suspicion of air embolus. And there's no evidence for that either. The timing of this event is clear because Nurse A told us that she was coming back through the doors when she saw what was going on. And you can time that precisely by looking at the door entry data at tile 180. It was at 2020 in child A's case. We know that Melanie Taylor was busy on the computer at that time because the system recorded that at 2014 she was entering her notes. And we know that Dr. Harkness was busy putting a long line into another child. So, ladies and gentlemen, although the unit was just post-handover, everyone else was engaged in something else. You know that is a characteristic of the circumstances in which Lucy Letby attacked many of the children on this indictment. Lucy Letby went home in the morning at the end of the shift, and at about the time she got home, she sent a message to Mel Taylor asking her to update a chart. You'll find that in the child B sequence at tile 55. The next thing she did was search for the mother of child A and B.